Good evening, everybody. If I could just have board members raise their virtual hand, I'm trying to see if we have a quorum. One. I see 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have a quorum. Okay. So we have a quorum. All right. Okay, now they haul off back around. All right, so I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:05. And we have Chris as the minute taker. Before we get too far in, I'm going to have Kevin introduce, because we have the Merger Study Committee joining us tonight, so I'm going to have Kevin introduce those members.
Thank you. So our homework assignment on the last merger committee was to attend this meeting and listen to the presentation. Board members from Madison Northwest, or some of us probably know it better as Virgin, would be Martha DeGraff, who is from Panton and is the co-chair. I don't know if Martha's there to give a wave if you're...
Yep, she's in the top row.
Okay, and then Erica Andrus from Ferrisburg. Rebecca Coffey from Virgins. Carol McBride from Madison. Keith Morrow from Virgins. And Mary Neffinger from Ferrisburg. And then Mountie representatives on the study committee are Mary Kate Kelly. Moncton is co-chair along with Martha. Dustin Corrigan is from Bristol. Ed McGuire is from New Haven. Troy Carity is from Bristol. Stephanie Rossier is from Lincoln. And the last 4 people are board members and representing various towns would be Brad Johnson from Starksboro, Sarah LaPearl from New Haven, Dave Sharp from Bristol, and myself, Kevin Hansen from Bristol. We have a facilitator, Tracy Wren, who is from Littlebird Education and Leadership Consulting. And ex officios would be the superintendents, Sheila Schul, Addison Northwest, and Patrick Green, Mount Abraham Unified District. That's the Merger Study Committee.
All right. At this time, is there any public comment? We'll start here in the room, and then if you're on Zoom, have a public comment you'd like to make, please raise your virtual hand. Anyone here in the room? Okay, how about on Zoom? Is there any? Oh, Patrick.
So it is January, and every January is Board Appreciation Month. I said this last year, and it was true then. And I'll say it again this year, and I think it's still true. I can't think of a time in recent history that it's been more difficult to be a board member in our area. The work that we're undertaking right now is really, really big, really important, really heavy, really controversial work. And the effort I see and the interest in doing what needs to be done to support our students in this greater community, but especially from the board, is really to be celebrated, and you are not nearly thanked enough for the work that you do and the pressure you're under, in particular under these circumstances. So thank you personally for what you do on behalf of the community. And as a token of appreciation, there's a gift bag for every one of you on the back, as well as some snacks and a thank you note from our food service collaborative. So thank you from everyone. For those that aren't here in person, we'll have your gift bags in the central office. So maybe when you come in and sign the warning, you can pick up your gift bag at central office as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for thinking of us.
Thank you. Is there anyone online with a public comment? All right. We'll move along to our consent agenda. The minutes were sent under separate covers, so we have the minutes and the pay orders. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved, Krista.
Krista?
Second, Steve.
Steve? All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye or give a thumbs up if you're on Zoom.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion passes. Next item is update. The financial report was included in the packet. If you have any questions, we have Patrick and Floyd here. Are there any questions regarding the financial report? All right, move along. So our next item is a presentation of the draft report from Nate Levinson and K-12 New Solutions. Nate's going to walk us through the draft, and afterwards there'll be time for board members to ask questions. I do realize that this may present some or raise some questions with community members. If community members have questions, they can email them to Krista or myself, and we will forward them along for Nate's consideration. Did you want to add anything, Krista?
Sure. Well, first, super glad to have Nate in person. It's great to physically see somebody that we've been working with for a while. And I really appreciate the work that he and his team have done for us. And I'm glad to see so many folks here. I'm hopeful that folks have a chance to hear what I think is a really intriguing and helpful report that set out to do the things we really we're looking for it to do, which is to help us get more clarity as we figure out what's next as we face these challenges in our district. So I'm grateful for him being here to share this, and also just know that this is the beginning of a whole new phase of this process, which will definitely include lots of opportunity for the community to be involved in discussions and input. So this is our first time hearing, and it's a draft still. There'll be maybe some small changes that come out of this that once it's finalized, it will go out again. But know that this is the beginning of many more conversations.
Great. Super excited to be here with you all tonight, both in person, for me to be in person, and for the folks on Zoom as well. Hopefully everybody can hear me. My voice doesn't travel great through a mask, so if I am trailing off, please let me know. I'm hoping two things come out of tonight's presentation and discussion. The first is just a broader understanding of what's possible. There really are a lot of options, a lot of things you might want to do, a lot of things that I think meet many of the wishes and hopes for the community. So that's the first thing I'm hoping, is that you leave here an hour or two from now and saying, hey, there's a lot of interesting things and a lot of possible paths to a good ending. The second thing, which I'm fairly more confident will happen, is we'll realize this is complicated. There is no one obvious answer. There is no, obviously you should do X, Y, and Z and don't even think about A, B, and C. And these possibilities are interconnected. Some go together very nicely and some not. So at the end of tonight, I think you'll feel that there are possibilities, and if it feels like this is going to take a while to sort through and make sense of, absolutely correct. So this is, the end of a research phase, but as a community, as a board, sadly or in a good way, there's a lot more discussion and planning to be done. One of the goals we had, though, and I'm hoping we were able to accomplish it, is to take what was a really complicated set of facts, a really complicated set of options, and try to distill them to both be understandable and to put some numbers behind them. When people say, hey, we should do this because it's going to save $1 million, well, maybe it'll cost you $500,000 instead. You should know that. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but you should know that. So we really tried to give you the facts to have a really thoughtful conversation. We have not tried to tell you what to do. I don't think people wanted that, and we definitely didn't see that as our charge. And I think the last kind of preamble before we get into some of the specifics, as we have tried to put together the facts and some analysis, a reasonable person could read every paragraph and say, you know, I would have run those numbers differently, or I'm not sure I agree with that. You know, we don't have the last word on this. We do bring a lot of hours of work, a lot of decades of experience. We have worked with dozens and dozens and probably 100 plus kind of small rural communities dealing with these issues. So I do think we bring something to the table, but not the last word either. And there will be people at the end of tonight who will say, I don't totally agree with that analysis, or I don't totally agree with those numbers. That's to be expected, but at least you have from us, I think, a very unbiased, as thoughtful as we could be, what we think and how we see the numbers. So with that, I'm going to attempt to share my screen and walk you through an overview. Let's see, I did not share my screen yet, sorry. Okay, let me get rid of one more thing. See if I can do that. All right, I think I have the technology working. So my night's already a success. So our goal is to give you an overview. Obviously, the report runs 50, 60 plus pages. I'm not going to cover all of it tonight, but I did want to cover the highlights and leave plenty of time for people's questions. Yeah, that's not good. Why is this not advancing? There we go. So let's just start with what were the goals of this study. And I want to remind folks that there were a lot of things you asked us to do, and we believe we have been able to meet all of those goals. The first was to consider a lot of options, not one, but many. Second, to really make sure that the community was heard and felt heard. And I think both of those were important. We certainly made a lot of effort to interact with community members, the authors from the community, multiple check-ins along the way. They've had a chance to see this draft report. They saw other parts of it along the way. So we've really, this should not be coming as a surprise to a lot of people. We wanted to hear from principals. I know when I first talked to this board, it seems like a long time ago, I said, you shouldn't be going down this path and having these discussions with principals not having a really important voice and seat at the table. And we've had a lot of interaction with them. We wanted to create a set of evaluation criteria. You'll hear me talk about the criteria a lot tonight. And so I wanted to just take a moment to remind you what that is. It's not important what I and my team thinks is a good plan, because we don't live here, you do. And there is no one thing, no one's list of what is good. So we really wanted to make sure if we're going to evaluate plans and options of plans, that we heard from the community and from the board, what did you all think constituted a good plan? What were the elements and the criteria to evaluate it? So throughout this report and tonight's presentation, we're going to be sharing how different options stacked up against a set of criteria that were developed by the community, reviewed and modified slightly, clarified by the board, but we are speaking on behalf of the criteria that you all set, not Nate and Carla and Megan's opinion on what would be good for you all. We've definitely tried to provide an objective review. We don't have a horse in this race, both from an educational research point of view and a financial analysis point of view. Just how we saw the facts lay out to help, again, you have a thoughtful conversation going forward. And then, of course, we wanted to compare and contrast how every part and piece of the proposals stacked up against those criteria, and we've suggested a few things that may not have explicitly been in any of the proposals. You'll see on the screen, you'll see in the report, I'm not going to read them all to you here, but these were the 11 criteria in short form. A paragraph or two adds more meaning. But essentially, if you think about the criteria that a good plan would be, not surprisingly, increase academic and enrichment options. That was important to people. Needed to be financially reasonable. Financially reasonable meant maintaining per pupil spending about what it is now, increasing about what it is now. So not a dramatic change in either direction on a per pupil or equalized per pupil basis. There are other criteria. One of the important ones that certainly got a lot of energy was a criteria that said the towns should vote before a school in their town is closed or repurposed. People obviously felt important about social and emotional supports. The one place that is a criteria that was, I will say, the least definitive was around the high school. I would say of the 11 criteria, there was very, very broad agreement amongst the Community Input Committee that helped us establish these criteria, that basically you got 2 thumbs up on, I would say, 10 of the 11. And when it came to the high school, there were really 3 very different thoughts. It was the one area in which there just wasn't that consensus. Some people thought the way you have it now, the facility, the size, perfect. Others people thought this building's going to fall down before the night is over, and whatever you do, you should not go forward with it, it's too expensive. Others thought that some kind of increasing the student body through a merger of one form or another was just the best possibility. So that was the one place where we really didn't see consensus as well. As I mentioned, so important to us was getting input from the community. So we've, you all as a board asked community members to come forward with proposals. They did. We talked to them multiple times, gave them a chance to share their thinking. We took their plans and summarized them in a common format, gave them multiple conversations to refine that. And then again, we've talked to people along the way, and also talked to principals as well. So a lot of input, we hope. The Community Input Committee had members who applied from each town. They were chosen at random, and we added the principals to that committee as well. And then something we did kind of in the background, definitely hadn't planned on it, but we recast your entire budget, which took much longer than we had planned on. But 2 things are true, and I mentioned this at a check-in. Your business office has an encyclopedic knowledge of your budget. Their forecasting and planning is in the top 5 percentile, maybe 1 percentile of the 250 school districts I've worked with. They know every number. They have a rationale for every number that's really solid. And the document is really, really hard to follow. And things are not labeled in a way that seemed either clear or obvious to us. And I think a lot of that is that you have a document that was kind of merged from 5 budgets or 6 budgets in the past. And it was really hard to get a good fact base. So we did recast the entire budget, which we'll share with you all electronically, and we reviewed that at multiple steps along the way with the business office. So we were in sync on the numbers. But if some of these numbers feel or look a little different, that may not be surprising either. But we think they're very accurate. And lastly, as preamble, this is a draft. It is not perfect. It will be much closer to perfect a couple weeks from now. We've already shared it with the authors. We've shared it with the Community Input Committee. We've shared it with others who have already pointed out, hey, a couple things should be tweaked, a couple of sentences don't make a lot of sense, a few questions people had. So this is still a work in progress, and again, that's part of our commitment to getting input and listening to folks. So there will be another version of this coming 2 to 3 weeks from now. So, as we are trying to help you plan for the future, I think we need to acknowledge that some things are more knowable about the future than others. And as we approach this, we feel it is pretty likely that the elementary enrollment will be stable over the next 5 to 7 or 8 years. You had a pretty solid enrollment forecast done by NASDAQ. They're the largest in New England. I've used them. I know hundreds of districts have used them. Their process is pretty darn good. No forecast is perfect. They're not perfect, but for planning purposes, it seems a safe assumption that elementary enrollment will be stable, but secondary enrollment will decline. So that's an important facts to keep in mind. We think that total funding from the state will decline. But what I mean by total, because most funding from the state is driven by the number of kids you have. And as your kids, even though the state will give you more per student, your decline in enrollment will lead to less money, not more money in total. And that the ESSER and other reserve funds, they're big, they're real, they're definitely a possibility to help in the short run, but they will expire in a couple of years, and they are not a long-term solution, but they can definitely help in the short run. So if those are pretty likely, there's some things that are much harder to predict. And I think this is really important to just be able to say, we don't know. Because sometimes when people are having a conversation planning for the future, if you're thinking, hey, the state's going to come and give us $4 million more, you will plan differently than if you're thinking, whoa, we got to plan for the future. I'm pretty sure the state's going to give us $2 million less. That's a big spread. You will want and think differently about what's reasonable. And as we talk to some of the proposal authors, as we talk to some of the community, people have very different predictions about what the state's going to do, for example. And quite honestly, we've asked around. I've been working in and around Vermont for more than a decade. We would say what we really don't know is how much money you're going to be getting from the state. This is particularly because of the weighting study. More than any other, we have a pretty good track record as to what they've done in normal times. We don't know exactly what will happen with Act 173, but it's probably not going to be a big enough impact that you need to lose sleep over that. But the weighting study, very realistically, could bring $1 million more to you or reduce your revenue by $2 million. And for a district your size, that's a lot. And if anybody says they know for sure what's going to happen, I will take a $20 bet with that. We just really can't know for sure, and that is going to be an uncertainty you all should live with and plan accordingly. And certainly, no one knows for sure the impact of remote work on school enrollment. Will areas like this start to see an increase because you can work from anywhere? There's good logic. I read studies on this virtually every day. There's logic that says yes, logic that says no, and I'll take that same bet if anybody says they know for sure. I'm positive the nature of work has changed, but what that will mean for you all in school enrollment just seemed too hard to predict, so none of our forecasting says we know for sure on anything that's on the right-hand side of this slide. You've got, this is, if that's kind of the less than excellent news, here's the good news. You have a number of very good options to think about. None are perfect. But I think they're like I've been in a lot of situations like this. We've done a lot of work with districts and areas with declining enrollment, and often we are choosing between bad and less bad choices. And you know, there was just like nothing on that list you'd want to do, and you're trying to figure out what is going to be the worst, the least terrible. I don't think you're in that place. I think there are a number of good options, good based on the criteria set by the community. But I do think that there is almost like a fundamental choice. And one choice is to have 5 elementary schools with what we're calling a cost-effective mindset, or to have consolidated elementary schools, whether it's 2 or 3, could be up for debate. We don't quite see a path, given your enrollment, given the likely funding, where you can have both 5 elementary schools and not a cost-effective mindset. So what do I mean by a cost-effective mindset? It means that staff are shared between schools. And I know you do some of that now, but in a cost-effective mindset, you look at sharing of staff and say, this is a good thing. This is what good leadership looks like. As opposed to you saying, whoa, this stinks. What can I do to stop that? I'd rather round up so I have full-time people in every building. It is looking at the same thing and saying whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it also means making being shared for the staff not terrible. It means you design your schedules, you design the job, you design, everything is designed so that being a shared staff member isn't so bad. Because I think in a traditional district where schools are really designed to be there all day, and if you happen to be that person who is shared, you did get the short straw. No two ways about it. But there are definitely districts that have created where sharing is both common and not so bad. I think it means where leaders wear many hats. That I might be a principal and an instructional coach. I might be a science teacher and the head of science. I might be a classroom teacher and an instructional coach. It is interesting that certainly there's a lot of cost effectiveness to that, wearing of many hats, but there's also a lot of argument, and I've seen this, I've implemented it, I worked in a district that did this, two districts that did this. It's really powerful for teachers, where you're starting to move away from either I'm a teacher or I'm a leader. Because a lot of teachers want to lead and they don't want to leave the classroom either. And in a cost-effective mindset, it is incredibly attractive. For a lot of teachers, it is also incredibly financially attractive. When you have more leaders wearing more hats, you will have less middle management. You will also have something that's called rule-based staffing. Rule-based staffing says, we will know exactly how many art teachers this school needs. We will know exactly how many first grade teachers this school needs because as a board and a community, you have set some rules. Now, different boards and different communities set the rules very differently. But the nature of cost effectiveness is once you have those rules, you know what it is. And it eliminates the debate. It eliminates the feeling, whoa, you're cutting somebody in my school, you must be mad at me. No, it's just a rule. It's not you. And it really makes things run smoother. It makes people collaborate more. And it definitely, when enrollment is declining, it makes some of that trimming automatic. And then I think it also means thinking about how do you do many things. You know, if the goal is X, how do you get to X in a good way without spending a whole lot of money? And just for example, there was a lot of interest in beefing up what I'll call community schools approach, where there's, particularly the elementary schools, but not just, where the community is more engaged, they're whether it's community social service providers or childcare or other things happening in the schools, not necessarily run by the schools. And I think that's a great idea, and there were different proposals and different ways of thinking about that. And sometimes, like to do that, you could say, whoa, that's really expensive. Or you could say, oh, we could do that and not spend a lot of money, but still get there. And in a cost-effective mindset, every time you have a goal, you then go through a process to say, how do we meet that goal in an effective but frugal way? So that's and I know the report goes into more detail, but I think that mindset changes, it opens up a lot of possibilities. And conversely, without that mindset, I think some of the options that people might be very supportive of, particularly maintaining 5 schools, become harder and harder to do. So I wanted to kind of put that either or. That's one of the few either ors. I think there are a lot of mixing and matching possible from the options, but at least as we've analyzed the numbers, this is one of the few. I don't think you can have 5 schools and maintain kind of what I would call the traditional mindset to staffing that we see. So, this idea of enrollment declines at the secondary level do seem to require action. Whereas I said there is a path to 5 elementary schools, particularly through that cost-effective mindset. The middle school and high school are going to see an enrollment decline. I mean, you can see it because it came through your elementary schools first, and those kids are just growing up. And so it does seem that something is likely to have to happen at the secondary level. Again, we don't have a horse in this race, but when we looked at all the criteria that was set, interesting and perhaps even a little surprising to me was that the merger with Addison Northwest, was really hit so many of those criteria. Certainly combining central offices brought a lot of economies to scale that would allow you to take those dollars, take those savings, which would offset some of the revenue decline you'll see from the state. There was just a lot of interest in how do you expand offerings for kids? How do you expand services for kids, particularly middle and high school? What we heard from the principals is, yeah, the offerings are thinner than you'd like now, but in 3 to 5 years as the enrollment declines, they're not thinking nearly so much about how do we add, they're thinking how do we hang on to. And absent some change, given the enrollment decline, you are likely to see fewer services, fewer electives, fewer courses, less not more at the secondary level. There was definitely interest in the criteria, particularly in the middle and high school range, of having a larger number of kids in a grade. It's just a social interaction thing. The idea of, I've been with the larger number of kids in a grade, better chance to find kids who will be my lifelong friends, who have similar interests, better ability to offer more after school and clubs and opportunities, that there is just generally a benefit. Certainly if you got to a high school with 4,000 kids, you've gone way past the benefit of more. You're never going to get close to that. So the idea of having more kids in a grade seemed to meet many of the criteria. And again, a merger at the middle school and high school level could do that. And then just it's easier to be cost effective. That cost effective mindset both can be easier to do as you have a large group of kids, but it's also important to know you could do a merger, not embrace a cost effective mindset, and many of the financial benefits will not come. So I think it's important to know that, and I've seen this, and it's really sad to see that you go through all the anxiety, all the discussion, all the vote, people merge schools or districts on the hope and expectation of saving money. And I would say only about half the time does that actually happen. And it wasn't that the opportunity wasn't there, but they actually didn't embrace that cost-effective mindset, and they didn't actually take advantage of that opportunity. So not a guarantee that things would improve financially, but definitely the possibility. And it would be within your control as to whether they did or did not. Another option that seemed to meet many of the criteria was moving the 6th grade to Mount Aim. The reason this kind of stood out amongst some of the options was one, the idea of having a larger peer group. We heard from some parents who were very supportive of small elementary schools, definitely on the keep our local school, but also said, by the time my son or daughter was in 6th grade, they've been with the same kids for a lot of years, and it's a small number of kids. And they really were kind of excited by the opportunity of jumping into a larger peer group a year earlier. Certainly the ability of middle school to offer more than a small elementary school is there. And from a financial point of view, it is easier. It is to be cost effective. Here's a general rule, if you want to write this down, from a managing cost effectiveness, the larger number of kids you have in a grade in a school, it is easier to manage that cost effectively. So the idea that you would have the 6th grade in one place rather than 5 would make 6th grade more cost effective. It would also make it easier to run a cost effective mindset middle school. So on both sides of the equation, there is benefit, both academically and financially. Now I think it's important to note that, because I know in the report that we did say there's a fair amount of financial benefit from moving the 6th grade from the elementary to the middle school. I want to be very clear about this. The financial opportunity is as much about overstaffing at the middle school as it is about just efficiencies or the cost of elementary schools. Middle schools, because teachers specialize, are just harder to run cost effectively when they're small. Because your English teacher is not your math teacher. And so that when you get below a certain number of kids, it is just much harder to staff efficiently. And so I think there's definitely an opportunity. It seems like the middle school staffing could absorb a lot of kids. And I just didn't want anybody to think that when they saw that, the potential savings, it's like, whoa, these elementary schools must be really, really expensive. That's not really the driver. It's a little bit of the driver, because having 6th graders in 5 schools does raise costs a little, but it's really more about having to do something at the secondary level than it was about having, financially, than having to do something at the elementary level. I think really important to this conversation, and as you are planning, I told you that there's a lot of discussion to be had in the future. There's a saying that anytime you talk about the future, everybody in the audience is thinking about, what does this mean for me? That's human nature. One of the things that can be very difficult for community to think about any of these options is thinking about, what does this mean for the good, hardworking, loyal people who work for us? Your teachers, your principals, paraprofessionals, staff in your building. We have found that 2 things are true. One, you can have a much better conversation, because this is a long-term plan, a much better conversation if you start every conversation with the statement, no one working in our schools today will lose their job. And what we believe and have seen is that through attrition, people move on, they retire, they move away, their life situation changes. Whatever changes you want to make, whatever it may be. We believe you can get all of these financial savings we've modeled through attrition. It may take 2 years or 3 years, not 1 year. But you will be able to have a more thoughtful discussion, perhaps even implement a bolder plan if you can take the, is somebody going to lose their job question off the table. Doesn't mean you can guarantee that they will teach in the same school, but they're going to have a job that they're qualified for, certified for, and the savings may come a little slower than you'd like, but it's a smoother, more humane way to get there. And you have the benefit of both ESSER funds and some reserve accounts. So if it did take an extra year or two through attrition, you have the luxury. I've worked with districts that are in such severe financial crisis, they don't have the luxury to wait. You do have that luxury. You can do this thoughtfully and be bold and be humane at the same time. So I think that will help you. I know it will help your staff. Actually, before I jump to the one other piece that I want to mention is, and I know it's in the report, when we talked about, and I should have mentioned it back a slide, so let me go back a bit, because I think this is important. As we said, the merger of the middle school and the high school seemed to have a lot of benefit for our kids, for the budget. You know, we really do believe something has to happen at the secondary level. And I know we've got some members of the merger study committee here who are not my client, but I wanted to say that, you know, I think the work you're doing is very important. So important that there is a lot of benefit to adding to your charge or to the charter or to the recommendation that you carry forward the commitment that currently exists that no school in a town would be closed or repurposed without a vote of the town. I want to explain why we've made that recommendation in the report, because again, for the most part, we have tried to avoid recommendations and just put options out there. And I want to be really clear, and this may annoy something, we do not have an affinity either for or against having 5 schools, either for or against having the value of small elementary schools. We're fairly neutral on that, but from the Community Input Committee and from the authors and from what we've seen, we know that many in the community absolutely value that. And if the merger is perceived, or in fact is, a way to remove that protection, it would seem to us that the chance of the merger actually going forward is greatly reduced. And that would be a shame if that seemed to be a way to meet many of the criteria. And the fact that there were other options that would allow you to run 5 elementary schools in a cost-effective mindset, that you'd be able to balance your budget, provide good services. It just seemed that, remember I told you, some of these things are interconnected. And what we have modeled is that one of the very positive options, positive meaning it met all the criteria, if it doesn't include some protection for closing schools, which seems almost unrelated to a merger, but it isn't. They're very much connected, I think, from a sense of whether they could have broad support. And it is one of the few, I would say, specific recommendations that if you really want a merger to get the benefits at the middle and high school and the benefits of scale at the central office, that embracing cost-effective 5 elementary schools and the protection of them, meaning that the towns would get to vote, seemed to be a package that came awfully close. Nothing is perfect, but it came closer to meeting the criteria than almost anything else we saw. So I wanted to show that linkage because it might not have been self-evident. With that, let me talk about where we go from here, then we will take questions. Oops, sorry. moving too fast. So where do we go from here? And you're going to need, as a community, a planning process. But we actually think you need not one, but two planning processes. Not to give you more work, but just trying to tell you the way we see it. One is an external planning process. This is where the public at large, stakeholders, get to have input, to digest and discuss the options, and then you start to narrow down the options, start to see which goes with which well. But we also think that as you have your external planning, that there needs to be something that we're calling linking hard decisions to desired outcomes. So what do we mean by that? It means that, hey, we're going to do X so we can get Y. We're going to merge and combine middle schools and high schools so that we can maintain elementary schools. Or we are going to wear multiple hats so we can expand and maintain coaching in a cost-effective way. I think that it's really important as leaders and as participants in this discussion that people make clear their motivation. We're doing this to get that. Because one of the things that I've noticed in talking to lots of folks in the community is sometimes the motivation is either not understood. I think sometimes it's assumed in a less than favorable light, even though I think the motivation was far more favorable, or just sometimes, like if I knew I was going to get X, I could live with Y to get there. So I think really being clear on we're doing X to get Y changes the nature of the conversation and will get you to a much better place. So that's the external discussion. Obviously, there needs to be a lot of community input. But we also think that there needs to be some internal planning. Remember, the first time I met you, I said you can't do this work well without the principals being a very important part of the planning, the managing. You'll notice that in many of the proposals, people were thinking about a larger role for principals in whether it's budgeting or strategy. So our sense is that internally there's some work to be done. One is getting the budget more transparent. Again, we've put forward a model for you all. We also think that as a district, and this is really because of your history of coming together, there is a need for discussion around what we're calling bounded autonomy. Bounded autonomy is this middle ground between central offices in charge of everything and principals do what they're told. Or the flip side is principals run their school with surprisingly little input or management by central office. Those are both extremes. What we've seen to work best is very clear lines of what decisions are made by whom, what decisions are made jointly. I write about it a lot in the report. We think that how you staff and manage and share staff and coaches and interventionists, all of that would benefit from thinking through a clearer, more defined, collaborative way of managing and staffing. And you might ask, like, what does this have to do with the merger? Or what does this have to do with declining enrollment? This seems to be a historic tension. And it came up in quite a few of the proposals, quite a few of the discussions. So we do think it is related. We think it should go on in parallel. And I think you're going to need a fair amount of time as a leadership team just to think this through, get a shared vision, get a shared plan. And that's going to just help you implement. If you got this internal stuff running as smoothly as humanly possible, it's going to make the external work and the implementation of this plan go that much smoother as well. So that's where I think you all as a community need to go. Lastly, final steps for New Solutions K-12. What are we going to do? One is we did not, we've shared the report and we'll get more feedback tonight, but one thing we did not do enough of is research the local commercial real estate market, because we have said that it'll be pretty hard to rent out your schools. Next week we will be talking to a number of commercial realtors to see if we over or underestimated that option. We're going to update the report based on feedback we've gotten tonight and before. Things like being clearer about the uncertainty for the weighting formula. There are other points that have come up already about when we talked about community schools, really wanted to highlight the value of childcare, which we didn't highlight enough. A number of people have said some of our language seemed confusing. For that, we apologize, and we will define some of the terms. We're going to share with you the reorganized district budget, and then once we've updated the report, updated all the charts, we will make available to the public in Excel all of our calculations and the new budget document, and deliver you the updated report, and then we're done, at least with this phase of the work. So that's what comes next. With that, I'm going to stop presenting and look forward to questions. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen as well.
I'm sorry, do you want me to remind everybody of how we're going to do that?
Sure.
Okay, so what we decided to do, if board members recall, is we're going to submit questions. If you wrote them down here, great. A lot of people have sent them to me by email. So I'm going to just start reading the questions I have so far, and then, like, if you have some, if you want to just hand them over to me or type them in here, we can do that. Okay. Thank you, Nate. Appreciate it. All right, so let's see. Okay, the first question, it looks like MAUSD has a lot of options moving forward. Certain components could be phased in over time and not all at once in order to, as the financial need increases, and to embrace a component that aligns with the evaluation criteria and best practice. What would you say is how we phase those things in? What is the path that you think makes the most sense?
Can you speak up a little louder? I'm sorry.
Sure. So thinking about how to phase in our option versus doing all of the things you recommended at once.
Sure, so I think the issue of phasing comes at there are two different reasons to phase. One is because there are some uncertainties. Like, we don't know what's happening with the weighting study. So if there was a decision that you're only making because, whoa, we could lose $2 million and we need to do something to close that gap. Well, I would wait on that because we don't know whether you're going to lose $2 million. But a lot of these options you might want to do whether the weighting study happens or not. And what I think that, to me, a more interesting way to think about the phasing could be to say, hey, where do we want to be when the dust settles? And maybe we do want to middle school and high school, and maybe we want the cost-effective mindset, and maybe we want to increase community schools. I think there's value in planning collectively all the parts and pieces where you'd like to be 3 years or 5 years from now, so that people can see the whole package. And then there's a question of what do you do first, how fast do you move towards that? And I think you probably don't want to do all those things at once. But I do think that it is helpful for people to know what the end destination looks like. Because otherwise, you announce or decide the first couple steps, and if my preferred step was number 4, I don't know whether that's ever going to happen or not. So I may be far less excited to support whatever plan came forward. So I'd get the long-term plan and then think about how many years it's going to take to make it happen.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question is about the weighted student formula that you discussed and whether you think that could indirectly penalize schools with staff that are tenured at a higher pay scale.
Sure. Great question, and we should have put this in the report. That's, I guess, why we put out a draft. But it's a perfect question. So weighted student funding is just another flavor of that rule-based staffing. The idea was to have a cost-effective mindset. You don't want to be negotiating every year. Is it a half a person? Is it 3/4 of a person? Is it two classrooms or one? you want to make those decisions in sane times. One of my favorite sayings is never go shopping when you're hungry. Never discuss staffing during the budget cycle. No, you discuss it in calm times. What are reasonable staffing levels based on the number of kids? And then you apply the formulas during the budget time. Now, to do that, and we ran some models, the way most districts do that to ensure that you're not penalizing a school, that they had more veteran teachers, so that, I have a first grade teacher, your school has a first grade teacher, but mine's paid $20,000 more, is that most people who do weighted student funding use the average teacher salary. And so your actual budget isn't the one you plan from. So your average teacher fully loaded is, I think, $93,000 in this district. So regardless of what you're paying your individual teachers, your planning budget says, hey, you get $93,000 for every teacher. So this way you're not penalizing anybody for having more senior or less senior staff, and it works pretty well, very well in fact.
Okay, thank you. What margin of error should we consider when viewing the NASDAQ enrollment projections? Should that change as we move farther out from the present?
So I think that, no projection is perfect, and your reality will be different. I think that every year, knowing what's going to happen next year is a lot easier than knowing what's going to happen 5 years from now. I think that, and we've said, like, the things you can be fairly confident of for planning purposes as a board and as a community, I would be thinking that your elementary is fairly stable and your secondary is declining. And you're going to have to tweak exactly how much you budget and exactly how much you staff based on the actual number of kids you're seeing a year from now, whatever year that may be. But so I would not be losing sleep over whether it's 1,412, 1,317, 5 years out. I think from a planning purpose, elementaries seem stable, and you're going to decline at the secondary. And that's what you plan for. I think your leadership, every year they have to do next year's budget, is going to be working around the actual numbers and the best estimate at that time.
Okay, thank you. I'm just reading this next question. I think you addressed this. It's related to the merger study committee and the motion recently made at a recent meeting of the committee to include the town's right to vote before a school closure. Yeah, I think you've already addressed that pretty well. Okay. Let's see. Referring to component G2, increased enrollment by establishing community schools, you state some proposals assume a combination of small local schools, adding community service to schools, and rise of working remotely will increase enrollment. It's impossible to say definitively if this is true. Best evidence currently available suggests this is not the case. Can you please point us in the direction of peer-reviewed research that supports your opinion that community schools are to be neither a draw for new families nor a detractor?
Sure. So as you may know, a number of the proposals had as a theory of action that if the local elementary schools were to increase the amount of community services and community engagement at their schools, that not only would it be great for kids and great for the community, which I definitely believe both are true, that it will actually increase enrollment. And by increasing enrollment, it obviously reduces the financial pressures on the district. What we, based on, I've got about 20 years of experience at this, Carla, I will say even more. I've worked with an enormous number of small and rural schools in Western Mass, Western Connecticut, Northern Michigan, or Wisconsin, Ohio. What we have seen in virtually, I would say 100% of those places, that the appeal of a small elementary school, which is very appealing to the folks who already live here, super appealing to the folks who have some history, and appealing to some people who move here for it. And so there's no question that there is an appeal. But in every place I've worked, and it's more than 100 districts at this point that we've looked at, nothing has been able to stop or reverse that enrollment decline. So if you were able to really start to increase enrollment through a strategy of highly supported small schools, you would simply be the first we've ever seen. Now we have definitely seen what's sometimes called wraparound services or the community school. They're very popular. So there's nothing we're suggesting that says this isn't like a really exciting idea. Where the data we've seen where you see enrollment increase have been in cities. So if New York City created a lot of these wraparound or community schools, and parents had a choice. Do I want my son or daughter to go to that school or a different school? A lot of people say, I want that school, but they were already living there, and they were just choosing within the district they were. So I'm not saying it's impossible that it couldn't be appealing, but it would definitely be the first time we've seen in 20 or 30 years of looking at it that it would actually turn the tide of enrollment.
Okay, the next question is back to the merger study committee, and you talk on page 31 about supervisory unions being less appealing to lead and operate, make it harder to attract and retain district leaders. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So two things you should know about me. One is I was a school board member on a supervisory union, and I was a superintendent. And a third thing you probably know is I've met and interacted with probably 40 or 50% of the superintendents in Vermont over more than a decade. Managing a supervisory union stinks. As a board member, I was a nightmare, as were my colleagues. It is just really difficult. And in a time in which being a superintendent has become less and less appealing, don't get any ideas, Patrick, but fewer and fewer people want the job. The number of candidates applying is declining. The number of people retiring is increasing. And I'm not saying you can't have a supervisory unit. They're out there. But as a superintendent, it is just a lot more work, exponentially more work, and it is a less appealing job. And so the folks who work, there are just definitely good candidates who I've met in the state who just wouldn't apply or would leave if an opportunity to have one school board, not two, one budget, not two, were available.
Okay, thank you. This is a question about, again, the merger study and the transportation study that was conducted. And some of the components of that suggested significant transportation times for some students, for some locations. How did you look at that study in light of your report?
Yep. So as many of you know, the district, independent of our study, hired a firm to look at transportation options. I reviewed the study, which definitely left me with some questions. So I called the study's author, a man who has been doing transportation studies for 20 plus years. I think he's done 400 of them and had a near encyclopedic understanding of your district, bus stops, the routes. He knew the detail And what they had put in the report, although it didn't jump out to me, were a number of options. And those different options, some were more costly, some were less costly, some had longer rides, some had shorter rides. What we modeled was what I would call not the lowest cost option, but it was the one that met the criteria of maintaining transportation routes that were no longer than what you currently have now. That was the goal. No routes basically over an hour, which is about what you're at now as an upper limit. There was an option that they had, and they believe maintains that goal. It definitely meant that there would have to be some slight adjustments to the start and stop times. There would definitely have to be some adjustments to the routes. So it was the one that had, at least in my sense, the best impact for kids, meaning it kept the rides to about where you are today. But it had the most changes to how you currently operate. So that's the one we modeled. As a result, it cost money, you didn't save money, and that's what we modeled that as well. So it did seem that if you prioritize keeping the routes shorter and were willing to make those other changes, you could meet the criteria.
Okay, thank you. How would your report change if and when Lincoln successfully withdraws from the district?
If it withdrew, and it's definitely that's beyond the scope of our report, and you will notice that it's not in the report. Obviously the numbers change a little bit, but the general trend, as I said, I'm thinking out loud, which is very dangerous for a consultant, but let's bifurcate that question. If Lincoln leaves, it doesn't change the basic fact that the middle and high school enrollment is shrinking, and all the benefits of larger class sizes, more offerings are still there. So I don't think it has any impact on what you would want to do for middle and high school. I think at the elementary level, if you have 4 schools, you still need a cost-effective mindset. So again, I think the numbers would be tweaked, but the general thrust of the decisions you want to make do not change significantly.
Regarding Mount Abe, this was actually my question. I wasn't sure. Did you look specifically just as at if the facility were closed? So you looked at renting summer part of the space. You looked at if only the middle school remained.
No. What we did for Mount Abe is we modeled, so there was an option, for example, that said, hey, what if we tuitioned our students to other high schools? And we modeled that, and you saw the finances. But the only way, if the kids at the high school went elsewhere, you still have 7th and 8th grade at Mount Abe. So we modeled that 7th and 8th grade stays at Mount Abe. Now I know there was a model, an option that said, hey, let's have K-8 schools. Because that's the only way you would, at least as from the options we saw, that you would close Mount Abe completely.
Okay.
Is both the high school kids go away, which was a cost increase, and you would need to move to K-8, which was pretty problematic, the K-8, both from a space side. It did not meet the criteria of having larger peer groups. It didn't meet the criteria of being able to expand services. So it didn't seem to us that you could meet the criteria and close Mount Abe completely.
Got it. Okay. Can you better explain this statement on page 23? Since WSF weighted student formula manages tighter budgets well, but doesn't actually create efficiencies, it may be harder to afford a wide range of academic and enrichment options for social and academic supports.
Sure. So weighted student funding, which is this idea of having rule-based funding. It says, hey, we're going to count how many kids are in each school. We're going to give you a certain amount of money based on that. We're going to take into account average salaries, not actual salaries. One of the great misunderstandings of weighted student funding, and I've worked with a lot of districts, is people assume, hey, if I'm going to set those rules, somehow that saves me money. The weighted student funding decides how much goes to each school. It's really like, you know, you got a big family, you got one pie, and you got to cut it into slices. It's a very good way of figuring out how to slice up the pie. But it didn't change the size of the pie. And I think too often, people view weighted student funding as an efficiency. It's a decision-making model. And so if you did weighted student funding and did not do the cost-effective mindset, here's what you're going to hear. Every principal is going to say, this is crazy. Like, you just gave me a budget, and there's no way I can run my school on that budget. And so I just didn't want anybody to think, I just wanted to separate out how much it costs to run a school comes from the mindset. Who gets to decide, or how you decide how those dollars are allocated and how they're spent, that can come from bounded autonomy or weighted student funding, but I really wanted to separate those 2 points. And the worst thing you could do, because when I say this, the worst thing you could do is do a weighted student funding without the cost-effective mindset, because that is just basically taking every problem this board and the superintendent is wrestling with and just saying to the principals, you go wrestle with it. And they have less, you know, authority and less ability to manage that on their own.
Okay, just a couple more
Sure.
that have been sent to me, so we're nearing the end here. What about elementary school choice? Without the ability to close a town school, do you think we should pursue more elementary school choice? Would that enhance equity and opportunity?
You know, so that's a great question. And there are 2 or 3 things that come to mind. So let me just define elementary choice, school choice. It says that you give parents the option to say, hey, you may live in one town, but your child can go to an elementary school in a different town. Where I've seen elementary school choice be pretty powerful, and it's funny, a longtime client was Montclair, New Jersey, which has just the claim to fame was they were the first districts to embrace elementary choice like 35 years ago, and still going strong, and parents seem to love it if the schools take on what I'll call a small amount of specialization. Like one school, I mean, all the schools have great reading programs and great general curriculum, and it's not like, you know, the movie Fame where one is, you're going to do dance 4 hours a day. And but there was, you know, in Montclair, there was a school that was just really known for its drama program. And another school that, yeah, they had more robotics than drama, but they had both. And so the schools took on a little bit of an area of focus. And parents seem to really like having that choice. Now, that said, about 75% of parents still sent their kids to the school closest to home. But it was very, very popular, and it could be a draw for even people coming into the community. So that's like the plus side of it. The issue of equity, it's really interesting as to it depends how you define it. Because there's an equity side that says, hey, my kid's really interested in this stuff, and having an option where he or she can get more of that is really providing what they need, and that's equity. The flip side is transportation. You know, sometimes it's either not every place that has choice will guarantee that the bus will take you there, or it means that, hey, I really want that school, but it's a much longer ride, or you got to change buses to get there. So I think depending on how you deal with transportation, what started out as like just basically positive choice becomes an equity issue. If I can drive my kid to school, I have more choices than, in a practical sense, than if I can't drive my child to school. So I think that's a complication that people are wrestling with.
Okay, a couple more here. These are from Sandy, so if I don't read them well, you jump in. Okay, so thinking about proposal D, which talked about potentially building a centrally located high school and converting the Mount A building. Sandy says she's been researching nationwide efforts to convert school buildings into affordable housing, senior housing, community centers. How does that factor into evaluating the fiscal picture of building a centrally located high school?
Okay. So we will, as I said, one area that we didn't do enough research on, so we are going to talk to some commercial brokers. But what I can say, in overwhelmingly across the country, it has been incredibly hard to use a school for anything other than a school. I give you a surprisingly real-life, right-at-home example. There is discussion of the central office moving from some rented space into, this is 15 people, into one of the schools. I think the most recent bid to renovate space that already exists in an elementary school to be an office was $1.3 million for 15 people. That's a lot of money to get space for 15 people. Imagine trying to renovate an entire school into something that's not a school. What we've just seen historically is it's much cheaper to build from scratch. Where we have seen schools get used for something has been charter schools, which is much more a city thing, or universities have rented schools or bought schools to be part of their university because you had classroom space and they wanted classroom space. So we've just not seen, again, we're going to talk to some brokers, but across the country, it's just really, really uncommon to see a school, an empty school, turn into anything other than a school because of the expense. Sure.
I know you're looking at commercial uses, but I'm really focusing more on affordable housing, senior housing, other state funding and resources, not just on a commercial private basis. And I just Googled it and found an entire page of all these schools that were converted to this type of housing. So I'm just wondering if that's something, I just wanted to mention that when you look at possibilities.
And again, I think what it all comes down to the dollar. So if you look at like the cost of renovating, and again, we see this even in when a school, if you have an old school and you want to turn it into a new school, it is very, just it's so expensive to take a school and turn it into even a new school that most places knock them to the ground, which drives people, the public, crazy. But when you get the bids, I was on a building committee in a, I'll say, a pretty frugal town. We needed a new high school. And when the architects and the contractors came back and they said, we can get you the school exactly the way you want it, I want to say it was $28 million back then. Or we can renovate the one you have. It won't be nearly as good as the one we were going to get you. And that was going to cost you $38 million. We said, wait a minute, it's going to be $10 million more for a smaller, less well-designed school. And they said, yes. That's why you don't see major renovations. And whether it's housing or a school, again, we'll look at it. But I wouldn't get too excited to think that you're going to offset a lot of costs from renting out or using your buildings for something else. You'll be one of the first if you can.
Okay, there was a question about the sister school concept. If you could explain that a little bit
Sure.
more, and then also whether that is something that could be utilized between Mount Abe and Virgin. That's the Addison Northwest.
Okay. So let's start with what is a sister school. So the idea of sister schools, and I know we use the term extreme sister schools, I'll explain why in a moment. Sister school says you take two schools and you plan and manage them in some regards like they're two schools, two principals, two teaching forces, obviously in two towns. That's the plus side that people wanted. But you're also going to plan in other ways like they're one school, meaning their schedules, I mean, I had an elementary school when I was assistant superintendent and had 2 wings. Literally, you walk through the front door and there's an east wing and a west wing. But that was one school, and obviously the schedule in the east wing and the west wing were in sync. When you have extreme sister schools, those 2 schools are going to have a schedule that is built at the same time by people in the same room, so that sharing of staff between the schools is seamless, so that it is not, if I'm a music teacher and I'm in 2 schools, you have built my schedule, so on Mondays I'm in one school and Tuesdays at another. You're never making me go in the morning here, my lunch there, back for one period in the afternoon. You might be having PLCs, teacher collaboration, sometimes would be between the 2 schools, because if one of the schools is small, if I'm the only first grade teacher, that is not a best practice to be collaborating with myself. But you want to build a culture in which these 2 schools both maintain their identities and at the same time share things. And the planning isn't, hey, I do my schedule and my planning, you do yours, and then we try to make it work. It's, we are in this together from the start, and we're going to make it work. So that's the benefit of it. Now, so that's what the concept is. It's generally done when you've got small schools or a bigger school and a smaller school. The second part of the question, could you do that?
So specifically with the high schools, would that work at the high school level?
So this is where I think the answer is, in theory, if we were all computers, you could probably do that. In practice, you're 2 separate districts, you have 2 different, you're answering to 2 different boards, and you're saying, hey, we need to change your schedule. And you say, no, you need to change your schedule.
Oh, this is assuming a merger.
Assuming a merger. Sorry about that. If you merged, there would definitely be some, yes, you could definitely do some sharing. I think the dilemma there, you could definitely do some sharing. The dilemma there is, remember I told you, the only thing I asked you to write down tonight was that from a cost effectiveness point of view, the more kids you have in the same grade, in the same building, there are just real economies of scale to that. And that would be like to have like some 6th graders in one, or some 7th graders in one building and some 7th graders in another. You don't get that efficiency. And middle schools in particular are very inefficient because of the specialization of teachers.
I would say that's why it's in high schools.
Oh, high schools, you could definitely do some of that as well, with staff moving between. Definitely doable. You get some of the benefit, but not all of the benefit.
Okay, I think this is the kind of $1 million question. What now, Nate? What do we do now? So, what if you were us, if you were sitting at this table, what would you suggest we do in terms of how to proceed in our planning? Not like what is the answer?
No, I wasn't going to tell you the answer.
I know. I didn't think
answer.
so, but I.
So what next? So one is, I do think, and I know, Don, you shared, if you have more questions, if other people have questions, the questions we've gotten have been really helpful. You know, I think we wrote a pretty darn good report. It was not perfect. The next draft will be much better based on the feedback and the questions we had. So I would definitely say, you know, give us the 30 days to learn a little more, crunch a little more, write a little bit more, and just get you a better, here's what we know, here are what your options are. Because I think it's a planning process going forward has to have some shared facts. When you don't have shared facts, it's really hard to have a good conversation. So we're hoping the next version of this report gives you the shared facts. I think that as a community and as a board, I think you want to start a planning process that's probably going to take 3 to 6 months that says, hey, which of these ideas have some interest? Not which ones are you going to do, but like, again, I want to, like the K to 8 schools just didn't seem to meet the criteria. There are other things that did. So like, can you narrow this list down to half a dozen things that seem to meet the criteria, that you can't do all of them, you wouldn't want to do all of them, some are either ors, but can you get it down to a shorter list of things to consider? I think that would be helpful. And then, I mean, there really are structured, facilitated ways of having people wrestle with trade-offs. Because I do think that sometimes people want X and Y, and you cannot have X and Y. It's X or Y. And I think that sometimes I've seen, if you're not constantly putting in front of people the realistic set of possibilities, people really fall in love with the unrealistic set of possibilities. So I think you got to narrow the list, make them a package of options, but realistic options, and then start listening to the community, not for a decision yet, but just which ones, hey, we could live with this, or we get really excited by this. I think that's that external public input and planning. At the same time, I really think you want to make sure there's that internal work where we're really working with the principals and the leadership team so that they're thinking through some decision-making rights and how decisions get made, because they're going to be really important in working out the details. So the public it's not realistic, and it's not even realistic for the board to be able to work all the details of these plans. You need the folks on the front line. You're going to need the principals as part of that, working with central office, and I think that internal planning will help you do better external planning as well. So I think those are the two parallel paths forward. And then the last thing I'll say, and this will probably be the hardest, is trying to keep people from jumping to an answer. Like, you don't know and you can't know what's the best choice today. And you're not going to know that a month from now. You really need to think through, discuss through, and to the extent folks keep their minds open for a while before you start to narrow down to to where you want to go. And then again, truly the last point, is planning that vision for 3 to 5 years out. And don't sweat what's going to be year 1 versus year 2 yet. That's like the last decision I would make. I'd like to know where you're going, and people to say, hey, when we get there, that'd be a place I want my kids to go, it's a community I want to live in, we can afford it. And then you let the folks inside the district really kind of map out all the steps you need to take in year 1, 2, 3, and 4 to get there. But figure out where you want to end. And then let the district leaders figure out the steps to get there.
Okay. So I think, Don, we told community members that they could email you or I with, and I've gotten a few already, so thanks to the folks that have already sent me emails. So you know, we're building a Google spreadsheet that we're sharing with Nate and just kind of bundling everything to make it easier for him and his team to respond. And so do we want to do the same for other board questions and feedback that come in after?
Sure. We
Okay.
can, if you want to send them to Krista and I, if you think of something later, definitely send them along to Krista and I. Nate, did you get any questions submitted directly to you?
We did.
Is that something you could share with us?
Sure. So many of them I've already addressed. Let me run through right. So we got definitely questions about, hey, what's the future of the weighting study? We don't know, but it's definitely a range, both very positive or very negative. A number of questions about the use for school buildings. A few people asked about weighted student funding and would the different teacher salaries impact the schools. One that I probably just glossed over, when we made the comment, and this will definitely be in the updated report, but thanks for raising it, Krista. We made the comment that the community school, those services have not been, again, they're very popular, but not enough to significantly change enrollment. There is one service. Community schools means many different things, and there are many types of services and many types of partnerships. There's actually one service that stands above all others in being an appeal to both families and to teachers, and that is on-site childcare. In a fair amount of surveys of teachers, the availability of on-site childcare is just a huge draw. And we know for families, childcare is a huge challenge, and it is something where, again, the space, it's a school. Classrooms are very good spaces for this, so there's very little renovation. Yes, we got to bring in some equipment. There's actually really great connections for kids with special needs as well, for services. One of the questions was, hey, should childcare be treated or thought about differently? And the answer is yes, it should have been. It's funny, we didn't say that. I've actually presented that publicly dozens of times. And so we're going to call out the value in particular of childcare. And I think there was one other question, only one other, was one of the proposals asked us to, suggested, hey, a 3-district regional high school. And it is true, we did not write a lot about it in the proposal. We should have and will. Economically, when we modeled it, because we did think about it and model it, but this was a complicated report, and I think it got lost in the shuffle. The modeling is very similar to the two high schools. I mean, you're going to see some real economies of scale. You're going to see an expansion of the ability to offer services and electives. So all the things that were positive about the 2 high schools are true about the 3. Potentially, you could even see benefits on transportation. You can make it, you're building it from scratch, you can pick where it's going to be. The one thing we will be writing is that it's just really uncommon to see 3 communities come together. It's a fairly complicated process to get to, and getting 3 would have many benefits, but we would say that it is less easy to do than getting 2. And I wouldn't say getting 2 was simple. So, but that was a question and clearly something we want to and will write more about in the next version. So I think that's what we've learned or feedback. And again, there are lots of very minor things around our use of some words and wordsmithing, and one person found 4 typos, which I thought we found them all, but we'll correct those as well.
You got your own? Okay. All right. So I'm just going to refer back to the chair notes. So for board members, just to remind you, the next steps are Nate's going to take the feedback and update the report over the next 30 days, and we'll receive the final report with the templates, and that will allow us to play with bits and pieces of it as we go along. The board will be discussing possible next steps at our February 8th meeting. One task we might consider is how to best share all this information with our community and hear their thoughts. Again, if community members have questions or comments, please submit them to Krista or myself. If you'll just put a note in the subject line that says K-12 new solutions, comments, and questions, that'll be helpful so that we can grab them and get them into that document. And then we'll forward those questions on to Nate and his team, and he'll share his responses with us. If you can get those questions by the end of that first week in February, that'd be great, so that we're not just waiting a really long time for the questions. That'd be great. Okay, Krista, do you have anything to add?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right, so our next item is public comment. Is there any comment from the public in the room tonight? If you just introduce yourself. So that...
Hughes, Fiber out of Starksboro. I just have a request, or it is kind of a question, if there's a way to, the word wouldn't be annotate, but the draft report is fine, and I've read it, and I've kind of digested it. Do I have to go and read the whole of the new report and try to figure out, gosh, did he change this sentence and now it's a totally different meaning than I understood before? Is there a way, I'm not talking about typos, but is there a way to somehow provide, these are the changes that have been made that are substantive?
You know, that's a great point. Yeah, we will give you a page or two that says these are the substantive changes between the draft and the final report, so you don't have to read the whole thing. Great idea. Thank you for saying that.
I don't mean that I won't read the whole.
No. I don't want you to have to read the whole report.
All right, anyone else before I go to Zoom?
Yeah, Nancy Cornell. I guess I just have, I'm wondering about whether, well, I think it's true, as I read the report, that there's a number of ways to mix and match the components that you analyzed in order to meet the financial goals of basically financial viability. And that there isn't, from my reading of it, there isn't one solution or even a couple of solutions that would be essential to include in a resolution that would be essential to reaching financial viability. In other words, there are lots of different ways to skin the cat, if you'll excuse the expression. Am I reading that?
Absolutely. So I just want to be really clear on this. We said you have multiple options, and many of them multiple paths that meet the criteria. You do not need to obviously do everything that had a savings. You don't need to do everything that was beneficial. You don't. I really believe there are multiple ways to get to a good outcome. I think that when I talked about that interim step of perhaps getting a narrower list, some things we reviewed turned out to be maybe not that great, as it turned out. The financial savings weren't as good as people thought, or the practicality might not have been there, or it didn't align well with some of the criteria. So I think if you took away the things that didn't meet the criteria or didn't get some of the benefits people maybe thought they would, you're going to be left with a pretty decently long list of things to consider. And yes, I absolutely believe the path forward, there are many different ways to get there. And I think that, depending on where the weighting study comes, you might need to do more of them or less of them to get there. I don't see at this point the doing nothing option would get you there, but I don't think there's one specific set of things you have to do or you can't be great for kids, meet the criteria, and be financially viable.
Right.
Okay. All right, is there anybody on Zoom who'd like to make a public comment? You just raise your hand.
Can you see any, Patrick?
All right. Okay, then we'll move down to our meeting evaluation. Oh, her.
So I appreciate Nate's presentation. Very well done. I also appreciate his report. I don't agree with everything, but I think it really is helpful in terms of the framework that he set out in terms of, you got some financial issues, you have some values, and you can have a financially feasible future with keeping the values that the community feels is really helpful, are necessary. I think the big challenge is how the board and the administration is going to choose to deal with the report and react to the report and make decisions on the report going forward. That'll be, I think, a real challenge. The one comment that one statement that I've heard, written out is that the board is going to be considering these issues for, I think the phrase is many months. And I would urge you not to take as long as you might want in an ideal world. Things are moving forward. I think some of the core decisions need to be made sooner rather than later, at least from our perspective in Starksboro, so that we know, what's going to happen. One of the concepts I think Nate and Carla and their team has had is you can phase some of these things in, and you can make some decisions, sooner rather than later. And some of the other decisions or, components can be implemented later. I think that's very helpful. I think the community is looking for a direction from the board. Maybe not all the details, but a direction from the board as to how the district is going to move forward. And I would urge that be done, sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thanks, Herb.
Okay, just one thing I want to add to that, if I can. Just as I spent 6 years on a school board, so happy I'm not anymore. But nobody ever gave me a thank you package either. So, no, never. But maybe I didn't deserve one. I don't know. Just as you all deliberate and move forward, I do think that the board's going to be tasked with making some decisions, which you will. But I can't emphasize enough the value of, as you are both deliberating and sharing the decisions, this idea of linking actions to the outcomes and the reasons. So if you said, hey, we're going to embrace a cost-effective mindset, let's just take that as an example. Why are you doing that? Not just because it's frugal, but it's cost-effective. But if you said, hey, we're going to embrace a cost-effective mindset in pursuit of being able to afford 5 elementary schools, that's different. It will be perceived, and it is different than if you're saying, hey, we're doing it because we're going to do it. It's a frugally right thing to do, and we're going to be even more frugal next year and consolidate down to from 5 schools to 2. So I do think that putting your reasons out there matter. Linking decisions, if we do X and Y, so that we can do A and B. I think that, and again, yes, there are decisions that you can phase, and I don't see implementing this overnight. But I also think it's important to be able to put a vision out there of what is it going to look like when most of these changes are done. Like, are you making these first changes in the first year because you're going to start here, but then you're going to deal with middle and high school later, or we're going to do these changes, and if the weighting study comes in favorably, we're done. I think that while people want to see some decisions, I know you've been at this a long time, sharing like part of your plan can be very unsatisfying if the part that you haven't shared wasn't the part I really cared about, or the part I really worry about. So again, I would just want to separate the do everything at once, which I'm not suggesting, but to have a fairly coherent picture of where all this is likely to end and what you're going to have in place when it's over, when the planning is over and it has been fully implemented, is going to be, I think, a better story, a more comforting story, I think, as opposed to just focusing on the first couple steps. Because if I like those steps, I'm very happy, but if it wasn't the thing I was most concerned about or worried about, you will see a lot of pushback where there might not have been needed to be pushback. The other thing about the planning, and I know you and we said in the report, you need to take, I would not rush to like next year's budget. Shouldn't say, hey, how is all this going to be shown in next year's budget? It shouldn't be. You haven't as a community taken the time to get the input, to do the planning. So, and again, I'm a person who likes to move fast. So I always find myself just like wanting to pinch myself that I'm saying move deliberately, not quickly. But this is too big, and you need to bring people along. You need to have those discussions. So move as quickly as you can, but not so quickly that you aren't bringing people into the discussion.
Does anybody object if there's, so I'm gonna, Bill has it.
Young lady, go ahead. I'm sure she'll be brief.
I want to ask you a little bit more about what you just said about create the whole plan, not just a piece of it. And I want to press you on that a little bit because it seems to me there might be some parts of, some components that the school district might want to put in place sooner, and other components that the district might want to put in later if one thing happens and not if it doesn't.
Yeah, so agree completely. So when I say create the plan, and thank you for calling me out on that, I wasn't clear enough. So you could say, these are the things we're going to do this year or next year. And if enrollment declines like we think, or if the weighting study goes against us, these would be the next steps we take. But if the weighting study was in our favor, we wouldn't take this step. So you can, it doesn't mean that you know every step. You know, there are some of these if-thens can be in your thinking. But what I worry about is if you say we don't know what the weighting study is going to be, and you don't, and you say, hey, we're going to do nothing on the presumption that weighting study is probably going to be fine. There are going to be people in the community who are going to be nervous. They're going to say, but hey, you've made half a plan. And I may not like the other half of the plan, so I can't even get my head around supporting the first half. Yeah. And so if you had said as a community, hey, if we really lost $2 million in weighting study, this is how we're going to deal with it. And if we got $1 million from the weighting study, we're going to deal with it this way. And we're not going to decide, we won't know whether we're going left or right until sometime in the future. But if you really did lose a lot of money and you had that financial pressure, I think it would be good to let people know where you're thinking of how you deal with it, but I would not pull that trigger. And that's also, again, and so it goes so much to why you need to explain the linkage. Like if we're doing this because we are $2 million in the hole and darn, we got to do something and this is the best of the bad choices. Well, you should wait until you're in the hole. If conversely, imagine the following. You're doing it because it's good for kids, the community wants it, it's more opportunity, we think there's all these benefits, and yeah, by the way, we save some money, which will be nice. Maybe I wouldn't wait to see whether I needed the money if the primary driver was we thought it was a better education for kids and it just happened to save us some money. So again, explaining the why you're doing it, because I think we're going to find is the same action can be done for different reasons. And if you don't state your reasons, people will also assume those reasons. So yeah, I don't want to suggest that there isn't a if-then in that plan.
Bill Mount from Bristol. Just a couple of very short questions. How long has your group been doing this again?
So I've been doing this kind of work for about 20 years. My colleague Carla's been wrestling with it even longer than that.
How many school groups like this did you say earlier that you had done this with?
We have worked with, there are 17 in Western Mass. I've worked with probably 20 or 30 in Western Connecticut. Probably another 20 or so in Ohio. So directly I've worked with a good 40 to 50, and I've spent 20 years researching what other people have done.
Okay. So what I would ask the board to do is to ask yourself a couple of questions. One is, did we hire this consulting group to confirm the things that we already believed and to confirm the things that we had already considered, or to bring to the table things that we needed to hear and things we may not have ever considered? And what the goal should be is to figure out which of those things that we're trying to accomplish and then grab a hold of it and move forward. Because I like very much what I heard tonight. I'm pleasantly surprised what I heard tonight. I think it's very thoughtful, I think it's very thorough, and I think that there is a definite path. And he has given us some information clouded in not punching us in the mouth with it, I think. He said a couple of times, you would be the first. What he's really saying is that's not a good idea. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm going to say you'd be the first. Somebody's got to be the first, but I am practical at my core, and believe that a lot of districts are wrestling with declining enrollment. This is a national challenge for people outside of the suburban or urban core. And so there are a lot of people dealing with this, and some deal with it better than others. And we can learn from them.
So it does seem to me that he's showing us the way forward without saying this is what you should do, but giving some ideas, this is maybe some things you might not do. So in any case, consider that. I appreciate it. Thank you for the time.
Dennis Casey had his hand up.
Dennis?
Hi, I'm Dennis Casey from Starksboro. I chair the Planning Commission here, and I wondered if, since most of our planning is focused around our local school, I wondered if any thought had been given to the impact to a community when its heart, its local school, is taken away.
Again, I think the values that all these plans were evaluated against were the values that the community set. They're not my values, my team's values. There's no question that one of the 11 criteria was to allow the towns to vote before closing or repurposing a school. I think that reflected the point you just made. So I think that drove the analysis, that people wanted at least their own choice whether to close or repurpose a school, and the analysis reflects that.
So no work was done checking the local towns here to see what goes on here. That wasn't part of your study.
Now, the community told us what was important to them, and we ran with that. I don't think it's my place to tell you what I think is important. We were really here to analyze it from your perspective. We did not want to bring our values to this discussion. We wanted to bring your values to the discussion, but to bring as an independent third party a way of building that fact base to help you make those decisions.
Do you have any data on some of the other schools that you've worked at where towns lost their local schools, and what happened to those towns?
Yeah, certainly I have been, as you know, I've worked with a lot of towns like this. And I've seen many schools close. What typically happens is, one, it's very ugly. There's an enormous amount of hard feelings. There is actually a lot of tears, and people are very upset for a while. And if you come back in 5 years, those people who were most involved with it are still mad, and probably will be for a really long time, and it's not something that people, quote, get over. And the flip side is people who are new to the community, and it's not a big deal. And interestingly enough, if you're new to the community, or didn't have kids in the schools before, whatever new school your kids go to, that's the one that people will fight and say we need to have. So I think my sense is that for those it is very important to today. It will be important to them for a long time to come. And it is as a country, and again, we see this all across the country, closing a school is extraordinarily difficult. I would say, at least a non-scientific study that says 9 out of every 10 districts that try to do it don't actually do it, even where they're nearly certain they're going to. And even if the whole board voted for it, it is really uncommon to actually get to the finish line. Because before it's actually finished, there's a new board. I'm not trying to be facetious. It is really common that and there's a new superintendent for that matter too, that the people who made that decision aren't there long enough to actually implement it because the reaction can be so negative. Now, I will say in the 1 out of 10 that got through it, often with a new board and a new superintendent, the hard feelings for those who are very involved linger for a long time. And for new people, it's not an issue at all. So that's my sense of, it's interesting. One thing I will say is, I've written 5 books on school finance. And dealing with declining enrollment and tight budgets is just part of what I've done for 20 plus years. And most of the research has said that, and you'll see in our report, the economics of school consolidation are really very powerful. I mean, if you just look at the numbers, moving from 5 schools to 2 saves a lot of money. So if you were just looking at it on an Excel spreadsheet, it makes sense, dollars and cents. At the same time, I told you that 9 out of 10 districts don't actually do it, which says that, schools are much more than dollars and cents. And from a practical political point of view, often you will get to a better place. Something needs to change, and sometimes it is very hard to be able to close the schools and see those savings, and having a different plan is both more practical and keeps the community together. So it's not saying it can't be done, it is done, but it is very hard. And I think that the feelings in the community linger, the frustration, the anger, for a while. Except the new people, not so much. So it's complicated, for sure.
In Starksboro, it's all we have. There'd be no reason to stop here. I don't know if you've run into any other towns like that or not, but that's the way we are here. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Okay. In light of the fact that our meeting was not the typical meeting, I'm going to forego the board self-evaluation for the night because it was not our typical meeting where we had a lot of conversation and discussion. So our next item is a motion to adjourn. Kevin?
Second, Sarah.
Sarah? All right, all those in favor of adjourning at 8:03, please say aye, or give me a thumbs up online.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Nate.
Thank you again, Dave.
You're very welcome.
Really appreciate it.
Would you like a?
No, I'm good.